Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Western Spirit. Today, we have one of my heroes, although it turns out we're the same age, which is like unbelievable. So, today with me is Ben Shapiro. Ben is the host, obviously, of The Ben Shapiro Show. He's the editor and founder emeritus of The Daily Wire and author of the new book, Lions and Scavengers: the true story of America, land, America and her critics. Sorry, my eyesight isn't that well. So, Ben, it's a pleasure speaking with you.
And thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Ben, in Israel in the past few days, we've heard lots of stories. I don't know if it's gotten to you yet. It will get to you because we've been talking about losing American public support for Israel, especially on the right and the younger American right. And so Netanyahu, our prime minister, has been going on to a bunch of podcasts lately. He was last night. We're speaking now on Wednesday. Last night he was on the Patrick Bet-David's show, and a few days ago it was on trigonometry. And what's being leaked here is that the reason is that Israel feels that the regular media, when he does Fox News or all these other places, it's not getting through to the younger conservative voices. So maybe you can just explain to us why you think we're losing support, because I assume Israel's not just making the decision outright. They feel that there is a problem there. Why is it happening?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a few reasons. One is that the younger generation is now in the process of basically challenging all established wisdom on all sides. And that is a kind of normal thing that happens, but it's become very extreme in the aftermath of 2020 and the COVID lockdowns and the BLM riots and everything that has happened subsequently. And so the Overton window has shifted dramatically and been exploded. And what that means is that things that were taken for granted and that a lot of people felt that they didn't actually have to explain have now been forced back up. And I think some of those are for good. I think some of those are for negative. But I think that it's good that the prime minister, among others, is attempting to explain that to young people. I also think that there is a new mood of transgressivism that has arisen on the right in particular. A lot of young people don't just want to ask questions. They want to say things that have sort of shock value. Social media has exacerbated a lot of this. And there's a bit of a grievance culture that's arisen on enormous parts of the left and now a growing part of the right that suggests that parts of American society, and depends which side you're talking about, has been victimized by a shadowy substructure. And that shadowy substructure has to be unmasked. And very often you'll see the far right and the far left sort of lock arms in deciding that the people who are responsible for the problems in the world are members of this shadowy clique, this bizarre conspiracy. And you can see how that shades over sometimes into theories about Jewish power. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of this right now. It's a combination of factors. Obviously, fighting back against a lot of those myths, fighting back against a lot of bad ideas. That's something that we try to do on the show. But I don't think that is unique to what's going on with Israel. I think that's true for a huge number of institutions that we've held dear. I think that you're seeing questions on sort of the young right about basic things like private property or the value of a balanced government in which the branches sort of counterbalance one another. Basically, the lid has been ripped off because of the institutional failures across the board. And now people are basically deciding whether those institutions ought to be completely demolished or whether they need to be corrected. And that's a big and open debate on the right, for sure.
But one thing that it seems to me that young people always, in a way, and you've been talking a lot about this on your show lately, the difference between younger people today and in the past. But I feel like young people have always been, in a way, transgressive to a certain extent or another. I think the difference is that the adults in the room, the older people, the people who should know better, seem to be. On the left, I have no expectations, but on the right, at least, especially since Trump has been reelected, you would think you guys would be like celebrating. And instead, everyone's like crapping on him and on America. And you have this entire, it seems, broadcast class of people who are just looking for where America isn't good and what people are trying to, sorry for the word, screw you over, or however you would say it. Why do you think this is? Is it only just for like clicks?
I mean, I think a certain amount of it is definitely for clicks. I also think that there is an addiction in parts of the influencer right to the idea of losing justifying nearly anything. And so if the idea is that even wins are losses, then that justifies whatever is the next extreme thing on the agenda. It's a bit of a demoralization effort. I've talked about this on the show before. President Trump has done an awful lot of amazing things. I mean, he won the election. The Republicans are in charge of the Senate and the House. And this has been the most active presidency of my lifetime, bar none, over the course of the first 7-8 months. And so the idea that somehow Trump is losing, or the right is in a state of constant panic and fear, or that the right is falling apart, that is not rooted in reality. The right is actually on the march in the United States, and President Trump in particular has been incredibly effective. When you see influencers who are claiming that all is lost, that we're living in a system where people can't get ahead, where we're living in a system where people are being victimized again by shadowy groups, I think the only people that tends to benefit are the influencers themselves, who then claim the magical ability to peer through the clouds and the fog and see the true story that lies behind the story. And I think that really lends an enormous amount of power to those influencers, even though what it really is falsehood. The reality is that in a free country, people in the United States have an enormous capacity to succeed. There's tremendous income mobility. People have the ability to make their lives better in a way that nobody probably in human history has ever had a way to make their life better. And so when you go in search of new dragons to slay, and when you consider every victory to be either a loss or a distraction, what that really does, it doesn't lead anybody to lead a better life. It's actually quite demoralizing, enervating. It makes people's lives worse.
And it's so weird also, like this one, we as conservatives, I grew up in a Hasidic community in Brooklyn, New York, and like we didn't have TV, we weren't allowed to have it. We were only allowed, I had a radio under the pillow listening to Rush Limbaugh, like reruns in the middle of the night. And one of the things that it seems to me we're always fighting against this victim mentality. Like when I lost my eyesight, I just love to bring it up because I was told by the Bituach Leumi, the Social Security equivalent in Israel, go sign to leave, be unemployed so you can get more benefits. And my immediate reaction was, no, the benefits will just stay in the bank. I don't need the benefits. I'm going to continue working and I got married after that and all this kind of thing, which probably wouldn't have happened if I would be a bum staying at home. And that was the basic tenet of being a conservative in a way, like by your bootstraps, pull yourself up. And it seems like there's like a culture of people just looking at how bad life is and how much everything is so difficult for them. And most of them, like I look in Israel and I'm looking at them. I was in New York not so long ago. Like your lives are so good and you're always complaining. And my friends, literally, I have a friend that lost his legs in Gaza and he's always happy. And like it's so like, how do you just looking in it, like, obviously you're not there, but you're looking at these people and you're hearing them. And it's very weird, no?
Yeah, well, it definitely, there's a phrase in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, that says Yeshurun got fat and kicked. And I think that is essentially what has been happening in the West, which is that the West is extraordinarily prosperous. The West is extraordinarily free. And people tend to assume that that's the natural state of things. And so if something goes wrong, then it must be because the system has screwed me, as you say, as opposed to maybe I did something wrong. And so because of that, people with a sense of entitlement have now decided that the system is not working for them and the system must be overthrown. Now, I will say that there's a bit of a difference between the right and the left here in the sense that the left basically makes the argument that groups in the United States who are historically victimized, Black Americans, gay Americans, Latinos, that these people are currently victimized by a systemically racist system, and that is the reason why they are not performing as a group in the way that Asian Americans are, for example, or Jewish Americans. And I think that statistically that's wrong. Historically, that's flawed. On the right, what you're seeing is a sort of similar momentum for the idea that white Christians are the victim class. And there you can actually make a case that the public policy has been actually oriented against white Christians, because that's true. I mean, there's truth to the idea that affirmative action programs being zero-sum do not benefit whites. That anti-religious policies, going after the little sisters of the poor, if you're the Obama administration, that is a targeting of Christians. That's true. But the extrapolation to all the systems are broken, therefore there must be some sort of conspiratorial force I can't name that lies behind every phenomenon in my life, and I have no ability to get ahead. That is an extrapolation that is unjustifiable in the extreme. And so I think that you see that, that there is a bit of a difference in the group that's being said to be the victim group, but it's always the same bizarre oppressor for many of these folks. And I think that is, those sorts of conspiracy theories, again, don't tend to make your life any better. And that, I thought, always was a core of not only conservatism, but biblical living. I mean, I think that the basic premise of the Bible, and the thing that distinguishes it from many contemporaneous documents of the time, is that the basic idea is not that there is a chaos-filled universe in which you don't understand what's happening next, and at any moment you can be smote by God. It's the opposite. It's that if you fail, it's probably your fault. Basically, the entire book of Deuteronomy is just Moses saying this over and over and over to the Jews, that if you fail, if something goes wrong in your life, if you as a group collectively fail, it's because you didn't listen and you didn't follow the rules. And that is an incredibly duty-bound cause and effect way of thinking about the world. And so if you don't like that way of thinking about the world, it wouldn't be a great shock to see you rebelling against biblical values, which again, generally put the onus on you for your own failures as opposed to the society or God. That's not to say that society never fails or that the government never fails or there's not bad policy. But as I've been saying literally my entire career, if you point out to me a bad policy, we can fight it together. If you just say that there's a shadowy force that's oppressing you, I'm not going to go ghost hunting with you.
Yes. And so extrapolating from that, one thing that in about a month ago, there was the Turning Point USA conference. And this was the first time that I really started being worried about conservatism, in the sense that President Trump is a transformative figure. He's doing a lot of very important things. On the economy, I don't agree with a lot of the tariffs and the debt things as a more libertarian-ish type of person, but he's doing the good stuff. The question is what will come after President Trump? Because when you look at the voices, that the younger voices, the people who got the most applause at this conference, which I love what Charlie Kirk's doing. He really helped President Trump, I think, get elected in a lot of ways, doing a lot of the ground game and everything. But you had Tucker saying that the Epstein thing was almost I guess, psyop or something. And then you had this debate with Dave Smith and Josh Hammer. Josh was on the show explaining what it was like being on stage. And everyone was booing him pretty much for being pro-Israel. And how is this like mainstreamed at this point, that you have a libertarian comic that says that Trump should be impeached for supporting Israel and being against Iran on the main stage of like the biggest conservative youth movement, and he's the one that's getting the cheers there, and then other people are coming in and saying like Israel is like the boogeyman of America and controls everything from on top. Like what do you think is going to happen after Trump?
I mean, I think that, that's an open question as to what's going to happen after President Trump. President Trump is a post-political, non-ideological figure. He's pragmatic in his approach. He's very heterodox in his approach. And a lot of cans of worms have been opened at this point. Now, I will say the Republican Party remains overwhelmingly pro-Israel, remains overwhelmingly pro-capitalism. It remains overwhelmingly hawkish in its opinions. I mean, the Trump strike on Iran, which was controversial among some of the figures that you mentioned. They were very much opposed to it. That had about 93% approval rating inside the Republican Party. And it was actually a higher approval rating among MAGA voters than among what would be called traditional Republican voters. So, I think that it's easy to be too online with some of this sort of stuff, for sure. And that's particularly true in social media, which is why I would encourage some of my friends who are sort of in this space to not be too online. Don't be online captured. Go out and touch grass, talk to regular Republican donors and what they believe about this stuff. And it tends to be significantly more in favor of the stuff that President Trump is doing than in favor of the kinds of things that, say, Tucker Carlson is saying. Mm-hmm. I think that continues to be the truth, but the willingness to humor and treat as a sort of mainstream part of Republican rhetoric, some of the things that are being said, obviously I find that disturbing. Now, again, it's a free speech country. Everybody is entitled to say what they want to say. That does not mean that every platform should has an obligation to somehow offer itself to whomever. I don't think that Charlie Kirk, for example, would be having Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on stage to discuss abortion. So obviously there's some limitations to what he believes ought to be on stage. And you can have arguments over what that ought to be. And I think those arguments are happening and are robust and interesting. But yes, I mean, a lot of these arguments are very much open on the Republican side of the aisle in a way that I don't find to be particularly good. Because I think that, frankly, bad arguments are being granted credibility that they have not particularly earned, at least from a conservative point of view. It seems to me that many of the foreign policy views that are being expressed in these halls are much more akin to what would be expressed at the Democratic National Committee than traditionally what would be expressed at a Republican National Committee or even by President Trump himself.
Ben, what about the left? Because you've been talking about on the show that the next presidential candidate, from your point of view, might be, there's a good chance, you've said numerous times, AOC. And this is a woman who's very unserious, let's just put it that way. Why do you should be, if let's say Trump has, you talked a lot about an economic downfall, let's say, is this the next phase of the Democrats being like the most craziest people that even Western European leftists haven't even seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're probably likely to see in a Democratic primary is a fight between an AOC type or a Bernie Sanders acolyte and somebody like a Wes Moore. Wes Moore sort of representing the more traditional Democratic Party, but left of Barack Obama, left of Joe Biden, left of Kamala Harris. I mean, Wes Moore is a very left-leaning figure for sure. Obviously, the fact that he's a black man will have something to do with success in South Carolina, where 56% of the Democratic primary electorate is black. That's what Joe Biden counted on, is what Barack Obama counted on as well. So you could see Wes Moore being successful, but I think whoever the Democratic Party chooses as its nominee, it's going to be a very left-leaning candidate. I don't think that you're going to see some of the quote-unquote more moderate candidates doing particularly well in the primaries in terms of either raising money or being able to really run successfully with the electorate. The Democratic Party electorate has moved very, very much to the left as it has shorn people in the middle. Now, you could see a bit of a reversion as the Democratic Party broadens out, but it seems to me the most motivated, the breakdown in the primary systems in both parties has meant that the most motivated minority tends to gain outsized influence. And you saw this in the Democratic primaries in 2020 when Bernie Sanders almost ended up winning the nomination, and basically there had to be a collusion by the entire Democratic Party to stop Bernie Sanders from winning the nomination, including a bunch of late-breaking endorsement from other candidates. So, yes, I think the Democratic Party is going to move even further to the left than they were when they ran Kamala Harris. And I think that right now, if you had to ballpark the Republican nominee, I mean, J.D. Vance obviously is the sitting vice president. It's been a long time since the sitting vice president for the Republican Party, who's not named Dick Cheney, didn't receive the nomination. So he's certainly the odds-on favorite right now for the nomination.
Ben, what I asked a few days ago, someone here in the government, if you had to start October, not like at the aftermath of October 7th, in terms of how you presented Israel's case to the world, where were the mistakes? Because it seems like everybody here thinks there's a mistake. No, we're not doing it good. We're not speaking our piece. The world isn't understanding. And he said to me, maybe we didn't do anything wrong. It's just everyone hates us. And my question, do you think that's like, how much of what's happening that we see, the hatred towards Israel, is actual hatred that no one can change these people's opinions? And how much of it is actually the way Israel came to talk to the people? Where was the mistakes, and how much did they even matter?
So I really do not think that Israel's main failing in post October 7th had to do very much with its outreach effort, with its attempt to change hearts and minds. I think that the failure came well before October 7th. I mean, I've been saying this as long as I've been talking about this issue, is that Israel has always made the mistake, this is true since Oslo, of basically treating its opposition as rational and humane, which is totally insane. I mean, the very premise of Oslo, which is that you have somebody on the other side of the table who you can make a deal with, who actually wants peace, that premise is bound for failure. And then when it fails, everybody already has a stake in Oslo. And so because they have a stake in Oslo, then that means that they're going to continue to maintain the fiction that actually on the other side of the table is somebody rational and humane. There was never anybody rational and humane on the other side of the table. It was Yasser Arafat, an arch terrorist. And that was followed by Mahmoud Abbas, a Holocaust denier. And that was followed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Fatah. So, I mean, it was totally, Israel has made a crucial error in attempting to convince the rest of the world that it is justified because it is peace-seeking, as opposed to it's justified because its enemies are actually quite evil. In the aftermath of October 7th, there was a brief recognition that Israel's enemies were evil. And then it turns out that went away very quickly because many, many people were just waiting for Israel to actually fight back because, as everybody who's ever watched the politics in the Middle East knows, the minute that Israel starts fighting, the clock begins. And then it's just a question of how long the clock runs until people full-scale turn against Israel. And so for me, the big mistake that Israel made has nothing to do with its sort of the way it discusses the war or anything else. It has much more, at least not after October 7th. There are underlying failures of Israel to even acknowledge the realities on the ground. Those failures, by the way, are not just with regard to outreach to areas outside Israel. Those failures are embedded in Israeli policy. I mean, if it had not been for the failure to understand Hamas, there would have been no pullout from the Gaza Strip. If there had not been failure to understand how the Palestinian Authority runs, there wouldn't have been funding of the PA for years. I mean, like this is a full-scale failure of Israelis to understand their opposition or willingness. I think there was understanding, but I think there was an unwillingness, an understandable unwillingness to try and overlook that in favor of any solution that would not require people to be fighting battles in the Gaza Strip or Jenin. And it turns out that failure to recognize reality means that you end up fighting in Gaza Strip and Jenin, no matter whether you like it or not, and for far higher stakes and with much worse consequences. So the big mistake that Israel made is they should have gone fast, they should have gone hard, they should have finished this war inside the first few months. They should not have stopped for love or money. There was again an understandable but incredibly difficult situation Israel placed itself in because Israel decided that the hostages and winning the war were simultaneously equivalent priorities. You cannot have two priorities in war. Either your priority is to win or your priority is to get the hostages out. And so as soon as those were established as co-equal goals of the war, you're going to come to the end of the war and you're going to be made to choose between one of them. That seems to be the situation right now.
Exactly. I agree. Also, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is about American Jewry. So when I came to New York, I told you about it before, for a week. I said, I'll line up some interviews. Someone said, do you want to interview the head of Reform Judaism in America? So I interviewed Rabbi, whatever his name is, I forgot. And he's the head of Reform Judaism in Canada and the US. And they have over 1 million members. And it was maybe 5 months after October 7th. And he said to me, we have a problem that a lot of the people that grew up in our movement are actually one of the organizers of the protests against Israel. And at least he was honest about it. And he said, so there's a problem. We can't even speak about it in our synagogues because some of these people that are sitting there are actually going to the protests against Israel. And so rabbis are a little bit worried about bringing up that Israel is right to fight Hamas and Israel is actually the right side in this conflict. And I was sitting there and thinking how can this be that the largest Jewish movement, religious wise, I guess, in America can't even bring itself to denounce members that support or placidly or whatever support our enemies. How do you look at that?
How I look at that is a natural outgrowth of the reform movement in the United States. The reform movement in the United States is warmed over left-wing politics with a smattering of God talk. And so it turns out that if your constituency is being sort of very, very left-wing, you have no capacity to argue with them. And if you are unwilling as any sort of leader to call out your constituents when your constituents are wrong, then what exactly business do you have being the leader of any community? I would not find it particularly shocking that there are a bunch of members of the American Reform Jewish community whose children have decided to become protest leaders against Israel. It's an amazing way of being able to claim that, quote unquote, as a Jew, you have some sort of special status in order to take leadership of a movement that is, in essence, genocidal against Jews, meaning the pro-Hamas movement. Yes. So it's a very nice way of dissociating from your supposed religious upbringing and demonstrating your free and independent open-mindedness. There's a reason that reform is dying in the United States. Just demographically, reform is dying in the United States. Conservatism has split into modern Orthodox and reform, and so it's basically dying. The only growing constituency religiously in the United States right now is modern Orthodox and higher in terms of religious observance.
Like the community where I grew up in Crown Heights. When I grew up, it was 5 blocks, and now it's going all the way to Williamsburg or something. I wanted to just 2 more things about Israel itself. So you came to Israel about maybe it was 5 years ago when I just started editing the op-ed section in our paper, and I reached out to you, and you were kind enough to write a short piece. And in the piece you wrote, I don't know if you remember it, and you were writing about how when you come to Israel, you are filled with hope in the sense that you see a society that's vibrant, that's living, that's cohesive. And I was wondering if you've changed your mind because since then we've had the 5 elections, the giant protests here all over the place. I live right next to Avichai Mandelblit, which is the former attorney general. So we've had maybe 5 years of protests under my house. So my kids are born into protests. It's they love it. These old Ashkenazic secular Jews just coming here for meeting other women and men. It's every Saturday night here. It's a nice protest. do you still look at Israel as a cohesive society? Because I find it hard to believe.
Yes, I mean from the outside, yes, and I think this is true of pretty much any society. When you're living in the society, you can spot all the cracks, right? If you go to somebody's house, you say, "Wow, what a beautiful family." You walk out of the house, and then you go back to your own house. Like, why is everybody fighting? Well, meanwhile, back in the house where you were, everybody's also fighting. I mean, like that. That's sort of the norm. Is that the closer you are to a thing, the less unified it appears. And so, obviously, me being an American and coming and visiting Israel, it appears more cohesive and unified than it would to somebody who's living in Israel. However, I will say that post October 7th, I think that the true heart of Israel came out. And what you did see was an extraordinary level of unity. Now, I think that unity needs to be bolstered. I think it needs to be bolstered in policy. It's one of the reasons why I thought judicial reform was good, but I think it needed to be accompanied by, a drafting of the Haredim. I think that it's inappropriate in Israel for the Haredim to be exempt from the military draft. I'm a very strong advocate of universal military service in Israel. So, the sort of policy that drives people apart, I think is quite bad. I think it's quite bad, by the way, in Tel Aviv when they're trying to now apparently get rid of mechitzas in literally every synagogue in Tel Aviv. I mean, like this sort of stuff is incredibly stupid. And I got to say, I don't think that most Israelis are really, opposed to either of those propositions. Meaning, I think that if you poll Israelis about whether there should be mandatory military service for everybody, I think that is a 70 to 30% proposition in Israel. It might be higher. It might be 80-20. If you're talking about should localities bar Orthodox synagogues from existing, I think you're talking about 80-20 no, right? So I think that you're always talking about these very small minorities who have extraordinary, reach in particularly the left-wing media, and obviously it's very robust in Israel, but also abroad. I mean, the truth is, even these gigantic protests that you're seeing on the streets with regard to a potential hostage deal, where they're saying like 1 million people are coming out. Okay, well, I mean, that is indeed an enormous number of people. Also, there are, 7.5 million Jews living in the state of Israel right now. And so, and it's unclear what all those protesters are even protesting for. So it may be that it just is kind of a giant cry of anguish, I think, for a lot of people at the situation, more than it is a specific call for a specific thing, other than many people that just don't like the government, don't like the prime minister. If you ask them, like, what is your actual, honest to God, like, give me the agenda points here that are more specific than abroad, we want the hostages home, which of course everybody wants, then it would be very difficult to sort of come together on an agenda for that. And I certainly get the cries of anguish because it's been 2 years of people being wounded and killed after the worst single attack on Jews since the Holocaust. So you understand that from an emotional level, even if I think on a political level and a strategic level, it's wildly counterproductive. But yes, I think that the case that I made in probably 2019 maintains. I think every Chiloni has a Dati cousin. I think that the level of basic religious observance, and I mean like the most basic, like lights candles on a Friday night, lights candles on Hanukkah, fasts on Yom Kippur to some extent or another, that is extremely high in Israel. Much higher than it would be for probably every segment of the American Jewish population, except for the Orthodox.
Exactly. Two more small things. Number one that I want to ask you is about like one of the things that we've spoke about after Trump was elected, that it was a sort of backlash against woke culture. At least the big hit ad that the New York Times wrote about was the ad of like, she's into they, them, President Trump is for you. That was the most, I don't know how they measured it, but I assume it's true, most effective ad. And it makes sense because people had enough of all this. But in Israel, I haven't really ever experienced woke culture. So when I came for that 1 week to America, there were gender affirming bathrooms in these malls in Manhattan. I've never even when I was in Tel Aviv University, which is like the craziest lefties of Israel, I don't think I've ever seen a gender affirming bathroom, or like I've never even like thought, even let's put it this way. I'm friendly with a lot of gay couples here, and their number one thing is to have children. And when you think about it, that everyone in Israel wants to have a family with lots of kids. Even like like gay culture used to be like nothing like that. And here it's always been like, we want a structure, we want life, we want family, we want meaning. And it seems so, why do you think it's so different here than there?
I mean, I think first of all that America has been exempted from history for quite a while, meaning that when you have external threats, then you can be unserious about things like our boys, girls. When you have an external threat all the time, then you don't really have time for dumb questions. I will also say that hats off to the Sephardim in Israel who have no taste for this sort of thing. I think it's a uniquely Ashkenazic Jewish thing to spend your days philosophizing over the nature of gender, whereas Fardim are just like, "Ani lo mevin, maze." It's like maze shtuyot. Like Sephardim have a unique capacity to basically be like, "This is bullshit. I'm not even looking at this." In a way that maybe many Ashkenazim, certainly American Jews, do not. And I think that's a healthy and normal thing for a society to just be able to look at stupid ideas and go, "Hey, that's stupid," as opposed to, "Why don't we get a symposium together and discuss the various ways in which this is or is not stupid?" Sometimes you should just be dismissive of dumb ideas.
Lastly, Ben, how do you look at our prime minister? So when I look at, I worked in the Likud for a little bit. I've met him a numerous times. I truly think also, not cynically speaking, that he really believes that he is here for a reason. And he is a historical figure in his mind, and maybe it's true also objectively, that he is here to save the Jewish state. That he is the one that has been transforming our region in order to save our long-term existence. On the other hand, he's had numerous flaws, ranging obviously from October 7th, but even before that, judicial reform, the way it was rolled out, was very problematic. We just mentioned that, but also throughout the years, it's a mixed bag. How do you, when you look at Benjamin Netanyahu, obviously his career still isn't over, and we give long life and everything, but how do you look at him?
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the war in Gaza comes to an end and what happens after that. I think that's going to say a lot about his legacy. But if you had to sort of write his legacy at this point, certainly the most important and transformative prime minister of Israel since David Ben-Gurion, and maybe including David Ben-Gurion. And there I mean that when Prime Minister Netanyahu first became prime minister, Israel was essentially an economic backwater. Israel is now one of the more powerful countries on earth economically. When Prime Minister Netanyahu became economics minister, which is where he did an enormous amount of work, Israel was an incredibly socialistic economy. It's still a mess of an economy with too much regulation that all needs to be cleaned up. It's sort of a nightmare over there. But the prime minister has done good work on that. When it comes to Israel being a regional power, obviously Israel has become a regional power largely under his tutelage, considering that he's been prime minister for 14 of the last 15 years. In terms of where Israel stands regionally, I mean, Israel is now has brought Iran to heel. Israel has destroyed Hezbollah. Israel has essentially defenestrated virtually the entire upper leadership of Hamas. Israel has been fighting the Houthis successfully. Israel has put to bed a lot of the, I think, myth making about the possibility of a two-state solution that was always idiotic, but has now been made clear to everybody. And so I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, whether you love him or whether you hate him, you have to acknowledge a few things about him. One, totally transformative. Two, incredibly smart, like very, very good at this. And then I think the thing that people really should understand, the perception of Bibi inside Israel versus outside Israel is quite fascinating, because obviously I'm not from Israel. Inside Israel, one of the big critiques of Bibi is that he's too slow on everything, is that he's incrementalist, he's too slow, he's too cautious. And then, of course, if you go to the foreign press, then Bibi's like a madman who's eager for war, warmonger, who's constantly starting fights. And it's just idiotic. But the truth is that in terms of just political aptitude, I will say that knowing many political leaders across the world, ranging from Hungary to Argentina to Ukraine to the United States, and knowing many of the political leaders who haven't been elected, Bibi is an extraordinarily adept politician. I mean, truly adept, especially in a complex system like Israel, where you have to hold together all of these competing factions just to govern.
Do you accept that he's the people who don't like him will say that he's the reason why the Democrats have abandoned Israel? Is that
that's horseshit. That's totally not true. That's total nonsense.
I agree.
No, the Democrats were moving against Israel my entire lifetime. It was slow and then it was fast. Yes. Barack Obama is the real reason why the Democrats abandoned Israel. And obviously, Barack Obama had a very fraught relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It wouldn't have mattered. If it had been anybody else, Barack Obama was very much oriented against the state of Israel, and the increasingly intersectional Democratic Party that has moved to the left on every issue was going to end up here sooner or later. It just happened to be sooner.
Ben, can you give us lastly a few words about your new book and what it is about and why we should read it?
So Lions and Scavengers is about this contrast we've been talking about between the people who wish to build, the people who wish to fight for their civilization, the people who wish to do their duty and create a nation of lions, and the people who wish to tear it down. The coalition of scavengers, barbarians, lechers, looters, people who wish to destroy economic systems, private property, equal rights before the law, who wish to side with the barbarians of the world, the so-called wretched of the earth in Frantz Fanon's description. It is about that contrast. It's a very personal book, so a lot of the book has to do not just with philosophy, but with me traveling and going around and experiencing a lot of this, and a significant portion of the book deals with Israel and the conflict in Gaza, the wars that Israel's undertaken. I think that it is a really important book about the difference between essentially what Cain should have done in Bereshit and what he actually did. And I think that, if we can all in our own hearts be lions instead of scavengers, or, not to get too Judaic, but to follow the Yetzer Tov rather than the Yetzer Hara, then we'll all be better off personally and civilizationally.
Ben, I have to say it's a true pleasure. I wanted to just also say before I let you go that watching you light the torch, I was watching here with my family because it was all smoky outside. We couldn't even leave. It was truly touching. I wrote a numerous, I guess, I'm pretty big on Facebook, not Twitter, because I can't take it. I wrote numerous posts explaining why all the people that were saying bad things about you were wrong, and it was very important for me to do that. And I got some people cursing me out, but that's okay. And I just want to say that what you've done all the time, but since October 7th, has been really touching for people in Israel. And I thank you so much for being who you are and what you've been doing, and for being with us today.
And thanks so much. Appreciate the time.